Hello valued viewers, I hope you're all doing very well. It's mid-May 2023, we have an early access copy of the F-15 and today we're going to be looking at the radar, the AN APG 70. Before I start, it's really important to define what we're doing in this video. First, we're not looking at weapons. We need to keep this in bite-sized chunks. We're not looking at weapon symbology, that will come later. Also, we can split the radar functions into two modes, BVR, beyond visual range, and within visual range, otherwise known as ACM modes. So today, beyond visual range radar functionality. Today, we're going to look at setting the relevant controls, then the B-scope radar symbology, as well as range while search functions, then the radar options, then IFF, then single target track, and associated lock symbology on the MPD and HUD. Then we're going to move over to TWS, TWS track while scan. We'll look at the TWS patterns and then the TWS functions. First, controls. Looking at purely what we're going to be using today. First, the TDC switch down, left, press, right and up. Regards all of the controls we're looking at today, you will either have to do a short press, so press and release before 1 second, or a long press, press and hold for more than 1 second, and then release. Next, coolie left and coolie right. Next, the auto acquisition switch, which we will use a lot, aft, forward, and press. And boat, aft. Also, castle switch left, and finally, radar antenna elevation down and up. Welcome to the front cockpit. Another note, we're just looking at front cockpit today. Rear cockpit uses similar but sometimes different controls for these functions. Today's mission is thus. We are here. Spread out in front of us up to 100 miles are a bunch of C-17s. The red ones are bad, the blue ones are good. They're at varying altitudes between 6,000 and 26,000 feet. There will be lots of pausing today, so you'll just have to get used to it because I need talking time. First, we need to make sure our radar is turned on, obviously, which is this knob here, and it's on. Next, we need to get the air-to-air radar up in one of our MPDs. It's already up in this one here, but let's just show how we could do it anyway. So main menu, menu 1, and there it is, air-to-air radar. Next, we need to make sure we're in air-to-air master mode, which is this guy here, which should be our default. At this point, we can focus in on our B-scope on our air-to-air radar. We're currently in a search mode. As a very basic overview, there are two different search modes. Range while search, which is our default, which is what we're in now, and TWS, track while scan, referred to as TWS, which has 5 sub-modes. Whichever one we're in, we need to have access to control this screen, this B-scope. We need to make this screen SOI our sensor of interest. To do that, we're going to press castle switch left long. Let's do that. When you do that, you'll see a small change in symbology. These lines have gone solid and we've got lines down here showing we are now in control of this screen. Let's break down this B-scope. I'm going to pretend that you just don't know what a B-scope is because I have to allow for all skill levels. It's a top-down view. We are here. We're looking that way. That is left. That is right. In terms of the coverage, the scale is dynamic, but currently set to 80 nautical miles. 60, 40, 20, 0. In terms of azimuth left and right, 0, 30 degrees right, 60 degrees right, 30 left, 60 left. We can change the range scale by moving our acquisition symbol, which today I'm going to call our cursor, because that's what I call it in all of the other aircraft to keep them similar. So, now that this screen is SOI, I can use my TDC up, down, left and right to move our cursor. If I go off the top of the scale, it goes to 160. If I go down, 80, 40 and back to 80. This guy here is our azimuth carrot. It will zip left and right and it will bump off these circles. Currently these circles are set to the maximum azimuth of the radar. 60 right, 60 left. That can change if I were to azimuth bump the radar by moving the cursor left. I've now azimuth bumped it and I've now got total left 30, right 30 degrees, a total of 60 degrees coverage shown by these circles. So the caret will now bump off these circles, and I can actually move that coverage about with my TDC. I can then azimuth bump myself back to full coverage by going off the right of the screen, and we're now back to the full 120 degree coverage. But what about the elevation coverage of the radar? Well, that's shown by this caret here, the elevation caret. It will zip up and down as well, but differently. It zips up and down in bars. Each bar represents a few degrees of coverage. How many bars of coverage we've got? We've actually selected 6, but we'll go back to that in a minute. Well, with 6 bars of coverage, we need to know how much elevation that actually gives us. So let's find that out. We need to look at our cursor. Let me liberate that cursor a little bit better. There is our cursor. At the current geographic position of that cursor, 6 bars of elevation is allowing our radar to see up to 40,000 feet and down to 1,000 feet. Also represented by these circles here. You can see that is 0 there. The circle is just above 0. 10, 20, 30, 40,000 feet. Now note when I move the cursor geographically in the plan view, those numbers change, and that's of course because my radar spreads out like a flashlight. So as I bring it closer to me there, the coverage becomes smaller. As I move it further away, the coverage becomes greater. Sometimes it can go into negative figures, and that's because it's theoretical. Theoretically, it's pointing through the surface of the Earth. Needless to say, I will only see radar returns of things that are within the azimuth and elevation coverage, which leads us on to the things that I can see. I can see lots of these triangles. They're all pointing downwards. These are contacts picked up by my radar in range while search mode. They're pointing down because they're all closing on me, because in the mission I set them all going towards me. If they were the other way up, pointing up, they would all be heading towards me. If they were squares or rectangles, then they are neither defined as heading towards me or heading away from me. Now the threshold at which it decides whether they're coming towards me, heading away, or a rectangle actually changes depending on which submode we're in. And I don't want to go into that level of detail at the moment, so just take it with a pinch of salt. Generally, if they're moderately fast and they're coming towards us, they're down, moderately fast away, they're up, slow or not moving at all, then they'll be rectangle. Next, some navigation information. Currently selected steer point. Sequence points 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. The current horizon line, of course, I should be able to fly this aircraft while heads down in this B-scope. So here is my horizon line. Here is my current true speed. Here is my current ground speed. They're the same because, of course, there is no wind at the moment. Here would be the bearing and range from bullseye to me, but I don't have a mission bullseye set up in the plane, hence it's maxing out at 999. Going back to the contacts that we can see here, if I unpause, I can get a bit more information about them. If I move my TDC over them, you can see it says 16. That means that guy is at 16,000 feet. And I can see him because he is between my current radar coverage at that geographical location of minus 2,000 feet and plus 43,000 feet. Now, speaking about elevation coverage, we come back to this guy here. How many bars we want to cover? Do we want to cover 8 bars? 1 bar? 2 bars? 4 bars? And so on. 8 bars means I can cover a huge elevation. 1 bar means I only cover a tiny elevation, a tiny flashlight searching out there. So why wouldn't I have it on 8 bars all the time? Well, the more bars I've got, the slower it takes the old mechanical radar in this aircraft to scan, and the radar becomes less efficient. So what that means is, if I know the altitude of the target, it's best to use less bars, and then I can actually aim my radar up and down with the controls we saw earlier. Up like that, and down like that. If I don't know the altitude of the target and I'm literally completely blind, then maybe it's going to be best to have a larger radar elevation coverage to give us a better chance of finding the target. So with a radar like this, it's always a trade-off about how many bars you want to use. One thing I forgot to point out in time was that if a hostile, in fact I can point it out, if I drive my TDC down here to 40, if the contact is off the top of the screen, they're now represented by this arrow here, and of course they'll come back if I move up here. Next, we've got FS here, which can be 0, 1 or 2. That is how long a target hit, which is what one of these triangles is, remains on the screen for. If I put it to 0, then it just remains on the B-scope here for 1 bar of movement. A bar is the antenna moving right to left or left to right. If I put it to 1, it means that a contact will stay on the screen for an entire sweep. In this case, an entire sweep is 6 bars. And if I change it to 2, the contacts will stay on the screen for 2 full sweeps, or 12 bars. So essentially, it's the refresh rate of the target. Next, GMTR, ground moving target rejection. We get to choose how big our notch filter is. The AN APG 70 will see pretty much anything that's moving, even cars. We don't want cars to show up on here, so I want to reject them. So I can choose a threshold at which any target will be hidden from the screen. I have the options of high, chaff, low, or medium. And I'll show up on the screen now how many knots each refers to. Next, SL is currently not functional. Next, what about this guy here that keeps changing? We've got 4 high, we've got 5 high, and so on. Well, that is the PRF. A radar is very finite. It has a finite amount of power, it has a finite amount of searchability. And so, for it to be useful, we need to optimize its ability to search. We do that by choosing for it which PRF it's going to be used, which pulse repetition frequency. That will help optimize it look for certain types of target. This is most useful if we know what kind of target we're looking for, which you probably would do in real life. The AWACS will say there's a fighter coming towards you, or there's a missile you need to search for, or whatever. We can then configure our PRF to one of the 5 modes to best help the radar look for that thing. To control those 5 modes, we have 3 buttons. This guy here, and this guy here. This button here allows us to select high PRF, medium PRF, or interleaved PRF. High PRF works on all radar scales, and that's another thing to say. Of these 5 modes, they will restrict certain scan azimuths, elevation bars, and ranges. The high PRF works on all radar scales and is best used at long ranges to search for bigger targets like tankers and bombers. It also works best for front aspect targets. Medium PRF is efficient at shorter ranges, also against low altitude and tail aspect targets, but only up to 80 nautical miles. Then interleaved, it will actually switch between high and medium on every bar of scan. It works best at 20, 40 and 80 nautical miles. If in interleaved and at 10 nautical miles, it actually automatically switches to medium. And let me show you going through those 3. High, medium, and interleaved. Now that sounds a bit complex, and I guess it kind of is, but it is something you must understand, because to get the radar to work properly and to find what you're looking for, you're going to be spending a lot of time adjusting those PRFs. And the 4th option is this, RGH, Range Gated High Mode. It's actually a frequency which falls between high and medium and works over all range scales. And finally, Vector. This uses high PRF and can be used in all range scales. The scan rate slows down by half. This mode is used to search for smaller radar cross-section targets like cruise missiles. So those are the 5 modes that we can use while in range while search to refine your search. I'm going to put it back to high. Next is enter, and this in range while search is to do with weapons, and we're not into that today, so we'll come back to that. Next, we've got the special modes here, here, and here, which at the moment do nothing, and as far as I'm aware, will never do anything in-game. We've also got our channel and our frequency selector here. In real life, you have to deconflict your radar from your buddy's radars, so they don't use the same frequencies. In-game, it's not modeled yet, at least, so these 2 will not do anything. Also, core here is not modeled. And there's one more I haven't shown, which is at the top here, which is actually a very important one. So I'm going to unpause and move my TDC about and watch what happens. You can see it's moving about. Should have explained this at the beginning, really. What that's saying is, while I've got the TDC at this geographical location, from here, where I am, to there, where my TDC is a bearing of 052 degrees for 71 nautical miles. If I move it closer, then obviously the range comes down. Next, we're going to look at IFF, interrogation. At the moment, in early access, this is very simplified. It's going to be padded out in the next few months and or years. When it's padded out, we will need to have a mode selected down here, either A or B. In fact, why don't we just do it? A. We'll also have to turn it on the UFC here, which we can't do at the moment. Whoops. Maybe we can, I don't know. Either way, it doesn't matter, it's not modelled, so we'll just put that back there. Next, we're going to use our interrogator by pushing and holding coolie right long. What it does is it obviously sends radiation out in the radar, which pings each of these aircraft and asks them to squawk back their IFF code. If they squawk back the IFF code, then we know they're a friendly. If they don't, we don't know they're a baddie, but they might be a baddie. So I'm going to unpause. This will work in TWS as well as range or search, by the way. And I'm going to push and hold coolly long. And what we should see is the goodies be identified and pause. Do you see that guy there, that's that guy there, and that guy there have now come up as circles because they are friendlies. Now, as far as we see at the moment in very early access, that is as far as it goes. We can find out which are the good guys because they've squawked back their IFF code. And if they haven't squawked back their IFF code, then we can consider them a baddie and we can shoot them down. That seems to be the best we have at the moment, and it will change in the coming months. So that concludes range while search and current IFF. Next, we're going to do an STT, a single target track. This is a way of locking on our radar to focus on just one guy, which we can either use to find out information about him or to fire a weapon at him. To do that, it's super simple. Unpause, find a guy, ideally a baddie, and push TDC, press. And that has locked the baddie. And in fact, if we want to get super nerdy, guys, it didn't just magically created a track. If you saw before it created the track, it actually did a little bit of glitching. Well, that glitching is actually what we call a mini raster. What we've done by pressing TDC press is we've commanded a mini raster, a search of this geographical area where our cursor is. It found in that mini raster this guy, which is obviously the guy we were trying to track. We know we've got an STT, single target track, on him because A, he's turned into the star. Also, he's got a tail, this guy here, which shows his vector, it shows his direction. Also, everyone else has disappeared. That's because an STT focuses all of the radar's energy on one guy, this guy here. We get information about him in the B-scope and in the HUD. We know he's at 7,000 feet approximate, or exactly 6,600 feet here. We know his speed, I believe it's ground speed, 349 knots. The all-important aspect, currently H, head on, he's coming straight towards me, or T, tail, he's heading away from me, or 9R, he's 90 degrees to the right, or 9L, 90 degrees to the left, or 17 right, 170 degrees to the right. That's how it tells you which aspect he's at compared to us, and it's very important to understand this aspect, but that's also shown by his tail here anyway. Finally, this figure here, according to the documentation, this should be the vector from me to him, but it's actually not. Currently, it's from him to me, so that may change, I don't know. We also have information in the HUD, so let's go up here. We've got his target designation box there. He will be in the middle of it. If it goes outside of the field of view of the HUD, it will flash, but guide you to it. Also, our steering cue, and I should go back, I missed that. Steering cue is there. Our steering cue is here. It shows which way we should steer our jet to get the best intercept, to get the optimum shot for a missile. Telling us to head that way because he's heading directly towards us. We've got his altitude again in thousands of feet. We've got his aspect there. This will be missile information that we don't care about at the moment. He has a range of 39.3 nautical miles. We have his range scale here. 80 miles, 0 miles, 40 miles, and you can see he's just below 40 miles. We have his closing velocity here, 746 knots. And that's actually one thing I think I missed off there. Yep, I missed the closing velocity, 746 knots. I now want to lose the track, so I'm going to press auto acquisition switch, press. It now returns to the search and we're back to square one. Interestingly, you can see that guy there, sorry about the noise in the background, an F-15E, believe it or not, is actually going over my house. I'm next to the 48th Air Wing at Lakenheath, and they take off all day, every day. That guy there has changed to a rectangle for the reasons we said before. He's outside of parameters of determining whether he's going towards us or away from us. Why is that? It's probably because he's moved towards the extent of radar coverage, and I'm about to lose him off my radar. So, that's range while search and STT done. Now we move on to TWS, TWS track while scan, of which there are 5 sub-modes. This is where it starts to get complex. What you've seen so far is the ability to observe multiple tracks and lock one. With TWS, we can lock up to 10 targets and observe an additional 20. We would use that, for instance, if I wanted to have the ability to fire at a guy while still observing the battlefield, or if I want to fire missiles at multiple targets at once. First, we should probably try and understand the 5 different TWS search patterns. We have wide pattern, 2 TWS H, 2 bars of elevation and 60 degrees of azimuth. Note, because of the extra work TWS has to do, we will never get the same amount of coverage as in range while search. So it's always a trade-off. Like I said at the beginning, we have a finite amount of power in this radar. This is best used when facing multiple targets at similar altitude but separated horizontally. That's the search pattern that will best fit that scenario. Next, 4 TWS H, 4 bars of elevation, 30 in azimuth, so a taller version. Best used in general surveillance of targets separated both in azimuth and elevation. Next, narrow pattern, 6 bars of elevation but only 15 in azimuth. Best used when faces targets that are stacked vertically. Next, we go into the high data pattern modes, 3 HDT, 3 bars of elevation, 30 azimuth. Best used when facing targets maneuvering vertically. And finally, 2 HDT, 2 bars in elevation, 30 in azimuth, best used when facing maneuvering co-altitude targets. And you can start to see why you need a Wizzo at this point. Doing this in combat is almost impossible, I would say, if you're a pilot trying to do this. You've got to look at the contacts. You've got to understand which directions they're going. You've got to understand how packed they are. You've got to think about it in 3D. How packed are they vertically? You've got to think, are they moving up or moving down? All these things, and then choose the right TWS pattern for it. It's a bit of a nightmare. So let's show the 5 patterns off. First, how do we get into TWS from our default of range while search? Well, there's 2 ways. Either you can have an STT lock and then go into TWS, which I suggest not doing personally. Why? Well, because an STT lock will actually alert the hostile that you're locking them. That gives you a tactical disadvantage. I would suggest not going in that way. The other way is to do a mini raster on a blank piece of the B-scope. So if I were to move my cursor away from any baddies out here, if I were then to do a mini raster, remember that means to do a small search of that area I've got selected by pressing auto acquisition press. While it's doing its mini raster search, which can take several seconds, I'm then going to quickly press auto acquisition aft short. That will slam me into the default TWS mode, 2 TWS H. Sounds complex? Yeah. Welcome to F-15E. So I'm going to command a mini raster, auto acquisition aft, bang. We're in TWS, we know, because at the bottom we're in 2 TWS H, the default TWS mode. Note, like I said, in TWS we don't get as much coverage, so we've only got a few bars of coverage here. We've also got less coverage in azimuth as compared to the range while search. In terms of range, I don't know. Note that contacts have disappeared, and that's because the radar has to start again gathering data. So let's give it a few seconds to gather its data. Note the symbology will be different in TWS. TWS is doing more work on the contacts. So look, instead of just knowing where they are and whether they're hot or cold, we now each of them have a tail. They've got a vector. We know that guy, that guy, that guy are going those directions. These guys are flashing. See they're flashing? That means they are reaching or have reached the extent of our radar coverage. They have entered memory mode, at which point the radar will guess where they're going, and if they continue for X amount of seconds in memory mode and are not reacquired, then they will be lost. Why have they entered memory mode? Well, let's think. I've got my cursor there, and it can only search down to 10,000 feet. These guys are at 7,000 feet. They are below my current radar coverage, therefore they're entering memory mode. If I wanted to, I could aim my antenna elevation down as we saw before. Ping. And now they've come out of memory mode and they're solid. But now these guys have entered memory mode because I've no longer got the radar coverage up here at 16,000 to see them. So you can start seeing the problem with TWS now. I'm going to move up again, I think. Back up a bit. It's a constant balancing act of finding the right pattern and also balancing your radar elevation. A Wizzo will be constantly moving his elevation up and down and changing through the patterns to try and get the best coverage. This is something maybe you wouldn't have a problem with on an AESA radar, which has much more processing power. So I'm currently in 2 TWS H, known as wide. I want to go to 4 TWS H, known as medium. What I'm going to do is I'm going to azimuth bump our way over there. So if you remember, that means moving the cursor over here. Azimuth bump. We're now in 4 TWS H with the associated 4 TWS H pattern. This means that we've got less azimuth coverage, only there to there, which we can move sideways like that. Now we can see these guys over here. We can't see the guys on the left. Now we can see these guys over here. We can't see the guys on the right. And so on. And they'll bump themselves into memory mode. Next, why don't we try narrow mode? It's a bit weird, but to do this, we move the cursor to that symbol there and press the TDC press. No idea why it's like that, but I'm sure there's a reason. So, down we go. Press it. We're now in narrow mode, and that will have the associated narrow pattern for all the benefits and the negatives it brings. Look, tiny. There to there. And there to there. Basically, I'm going to lose all of my contacts now. If I want to get out of narrow, all I've got to do is do the azimuth bump. So I'm going to move my cursor over here. And let's bump it out to medium. I think I can bump it out to wide. Yep, bumped out to wide. We're back to wide. Next, I would like to enter one of the high data rate modes. Let's go to 2 HDT. To do that, I'm going to do a long press of auto acquisition forward. So let's watch that happen. Press and hold and let go. We're now in 2 HDT and it will have the advantages and disadvantages as we described before. Next, let's go to the other mode, 3 HDT, with a short press of auto acquisition right. Now we're in 3 HDT. And finally, if I want to get back to the beginning default mode, the wide mode, the 2 TWS H, then I'm going to just bump stop. So, and we're back to the default 2 TWS H. I've shown you some of the ways of navigating between those 5 search patterns. There are other ways. I can't show you them all. You'll have to read the manual to find them out. Which leaves us with the final thing I need to show you, and that is the actual functions of TWS. So far we've shown how to look at stuff with TWS, but not how to do anything. So the first thing I'm going to do is some target sampling. So in the default TWS 2 TWS H, I'll unpause. I just want to let everything repopulate because everything needs to, reset again. Takes a few seconds. Come on, in you come. If I move my cursor over one of these guys, I get 2 bits of information. 16, he's at 16,000 feet. He's at 0.2. He's at Mach 0.2 also. An elongated tail to show his vector. Next, multi-target designation. I want to lock these guys to start firing lots of missiles at them. The first thing you need to do is ideally get rid of auto. With auto on down here, what it's going to do is when you try and lock one of these guys, it's going to lock the nearest 10 guys. I don't want to lock 10 guys, and I don't know why you ever would. So I want full control of this. So I'm going to unpause. I'm going to turn auto off. I want to lock as my PDT, primary designated target, this guy here. So I'm going to move the cursor on him and I'm going to press TDC press. Pam. You can see he's got the star on him, which means he's the PDT, the primary designated target. We need to call him that now because we can have multiple targets. Well, let's go and designate now an STT, a secondary designated target. So unpause. Get that guy there. Note when I clicked on him, he went from a solid square to a hollow square. He is now an STT, a secondary designated target. I want to add another one. What about this guy up here? Got him. I know it's all a bit flickery and weird, but that's radars, I'm afraid. He's a hollow target. He's now my 3rd target. If I wanted now, I can pull the trigger 3 times and fire 3 AMRAAMs off, but that's not for today. Well, I've changed my mind. Actually, I don't want this guy designated. I want to undesignate him. So press boat switch aft short. And he's undesignated. I've just now got the 2. You can see they're starting to turn around. I've caught them at a bad time. They're starting to turn a corner, but let's try and stick with it. So that was multi-target designation, and you can have up to 10 and monitor another 20. Next is quick step. Let's say I've got X amount of targets tracked. Well, I've only got 2 here, but that will do, I think. If I want to swap which one is the PDT, I can press Coolie Up Short. That will switch which one is the PDT. The PDT is the one that I will fire at first, and it's also the one that I will get the track symbology for in my B-scope and in the HUD, like we saw with the STT. So let's try Coolie Up and see what it does. Ping is swapped to that guy. I'm going to try it again. It should theoretically swap back. There we go. You can swap between the 10 that you may have selected. Unfortunately, I'm in a position now where I'm about to lose contact with these guys. They're starting to flash, which means they're going into memory mode, and I'm going to lose them, but we'll carry on for as long as we can. Next is quick pick. It's another way of choosing which is your PDT. All it means is of the guys you have selected, of which I have 2, I can move the cursor to a different one, press TDC press, and that will become my PDT. So unpause, quick as I can. Oh, I've just lost that guy. I've lost him. Dognammit. I'm going to restart, guys. I just ran out of space there, basically. Okay, we've got a fresh setup here. Castle long left. Move the cursor out into the middle of nowhere. Force a mini raster. Acquisition aft gives us 2 TWS H. Speed up, let it populate. So remove auto so we don't lock a load of guys at once. Let's start locking some guys. So I want him as a PDT. I want him as an STT. And I want him as an STT. Now all I wanted to show next was the quick pick function, and all that means is if I want to change one of my locked targets to my PDT, then I move the cursor to him, press TDC depress, and now he's my PDT. He's the one I'm going to fire my missile at. Next, I want to show DTT, dual target track, which allows me to select and deal with 2 targets at once. So to get there, I'm going to deselect one of these guys. I'm going to go over him. I'm going to go boat aft. I've just got these 2 selected now. To convert this STT to a DTT, I'm going to hover over him and push and hold TDC press for more than 1 second. Bang. I'm now in DTT. And if I want to get out of DTT back to the base to TWS H search, then I'm just going to use auto acquisition forward short. Pang. And I'm back to, it's actually put me back from 3DT. But I can get back to 2 TWS H, if you remember, by an azimuth bump. So I'm going to unpause, azimuth bump it back to 2 TWS H. We're now back in basic 2 TWS H, and you can start to see why I have to pause it so much now, viewers. So much to freaking talk about. Which leads us to the last function of TWS, which is the auto selection mode. And if I've still got enough time in this setup, I'm not sure I do, but I'm going to try. I'm going to unpause. I'm going to undesignate this guy here. The boat. Actually, I'm trying undesignating this guy. They're all undesignated now. What I'm going to do now is put automatic mode in. Pang. And now I'm going to try locking up one guy, and it should lock up his 9 other nearest buddies for a giant salvo of missiles. So, that guy there. Pang. It's locked up everyone that it can. Him, but not him and him because they've gone into memory, and for some reason not him. Maybe he's too far away. And finally, let's return from TWS to our range while search /STT with a push of auto acquisition aft. A short push, I should say. That's put us back into an STT lock of our current PDT. And of course, we can then unlock him with a short press of auto acquisition press. And now we're back to range while search, right back to the beginning. That is the functionality of our AN APG 70 and our F-15E mid-May 2023. Obviously, more will come in the following months. We've covered today radar and B-scope symbology, range while search functionality, radar options, current interrogation, single target track, along with a lock symbology in the MPD and HUD, TWS patterns and TWS functions. I hope that was useful, and see you later.